The chapel was suffocating with silence. My voice cracked as I delivered the most insincere words of my life. Patricia Dawson was a pillar of strength, a lie. Everyone knew she despised me. Her daughter-in-law, Sarah Whitman, the woman she swore was never good enough for her only son. But I played my part, painting Patricia as kind, wise, and generous, while in truth her sharp tongue had carved scars into my life for years. I ended my speech with fake tears and stepped down, my heart pounding with relief that it was over. That's when Daniel Pierce, her longtime lawyer, leaned close and whispered, his words colder than the Texas marble floor beneath us. "Congratulations, Sarah. You just passed her final test." The greedy faces of Patricia's children and cousins twisted with unease. They had come expecting an easy inheritance. None of them were prepared for the truth hidden in her will. 5 years earlier, I had walked into the Dawson family mansion in Highland Park, Dallas, with my hand proudly intertwined with Michael's. The engagement ring, a family heirloom, caught the summer light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I remember thinking it was too grand, too heavy for my finger. Little did I know it was the lightest burden I would bear in this family. "Mother, I'd like you to meet Sarah," Michael said, his voice carrying that hint of nervousness I'd never heard before. Patricia Dawson sat like a queen on her white leather armchair. Her silver hair was perfectly coiffed, not a strand out of place. Her eyes, sharp blue, calculating, scanned me from head to toe. I felt naked, exposed. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. "So this is the girl," her first words to me. Not a question, but an assessment. "I thought you said she was special." My cheeks burned. Michael's hand tightened around mine. "She is, Mother. Sarah's brilliant. She's just finished her master's in education," Patricia interrupted. "Yes, I remember now. Teaching. Children. How quaint." She stood, a slender woman whose presence somehow filled the room. Her Chanel suit probably cost more than my year's salary at the time. She circled me once, like a predator sizing up prey. "Well, I suppose we'll have to work with what we have." She turned to Michael. "Your father would have expected more, but he's not here to voice his disappointment, is he?" That night, as we drove back to my modest apartment, I asked Michael, "Does she always cut that deep on the first meeting, or am I special?" He tried to laugh it off. "She's just protective. Dad's death hit her hard. She'll warm up once she knows you." But Patricia Dawson never warmed up. If anything, the temperature dropped further with each encounter. At our engagement party at the Dallas Country Club, she introduced me as Michael's current choice to her friends. At the rehearsal dinner, she reminisced about the lovely Kimberly Sullivan who Michael had dated in college. From the Sullivans, you know, while staring directly at me. The wedding itself was a battlefield disguised as a celebration. Patricia had insisted on planning everything, overruling my simple wishes with extravagant alternatives. "Dawsons don't do simple," she'd say, making the word sound like a sin. I wanted wildflowers. She ordered exotic orchids flown in from Thailand. I wanted a small ceremony. She invited 300 of Dallas's elite. I wanted my childhood pastor to officiate. She insisted on the bishop who had baptized Michael. My mother, a kindergarten teacher from Austin who raised me alone after Dad left, sat uncomfortably in her best dress, looking out of place among the diamonds and designer labels. Patricia seated her at the farthest table, next to the kitchen doors. "Just remember who you're marrying," my mother whispered when she hugged me goodbye. Not her, not the family name, just him. I clung to that advice during the early years. Michael and I lived in a beautiful townhouse, Patricia's. Wedding gift that came with invisible strings. Every Sunday dinner at the mansion became an exercise in restraint. Each holiday, a test of endurance. "Sarah, darling, do you always use that much butter?" Patricia would ask at Thanksgiving as I prepared the mashed potatoes. "The dress is brave," she commented at the Christmas gala when I wore a red cocktail dress instead of the traditional black she preferred. "Education is such a noble profession," she would tell her friends at her charity luncheons. "Sarah doesn't mind the modest compensation." Always with that pause, that slight emphasis that turned compliments into barbs. Rebecca, Patricia's daughter, learned from her mother's playbook. 2 years younger than Michael, she had her mother's cutting wit without the polished restraint. "My brother always had a thing for charity cases," she whispered to her cousin loud enough for me to hear at a family gathering. "Remember that 3-legged dog he brought home from the pound?" And Charles, Michael's cousin but raised almost as a brother after his parents died, was no better. Handsome, entitled, and resentful of Michael's position as Patricia's son, he seemed to delight in my discomfort. "How's life among the common folk, Sarah?" he would ask whenever Michael and I chose to attend public events instead of private club functions. Still teaching the underprivileged to read? Michael defended me when present, but his career as a corporate attorney kept him working long hours. I was often left to face the Dawson firing squad alone, and Patricia's house was a minefield of family portraits, antiques with stories I didn't know, and traditions I couldn't seem to learn quickly enough. "That vase is Ming Dynasty," Patricia snapped when I once placed fresh flowers in what looked like an ordinary blue and white container. "Not a receptacle for your supermarket carnations." I tried everything to win her approval. I volunteered for her charities. I took cooking classes to master her family recipes. I even started dressing more conservatively, adopting the pearls and twin-set uniform she favored. Nothing worked. 2 years into our marriage, Michael and I hit a rough patch. The pressure of his work and my growing unhappiness created a chasm between us. When Patricia learned of our struggles through Rebecca, who had overheard me confiding in a friend, she invited us to dinner. "Marriage requires sacrifice," she told me over dessert, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Usually from the party with the most to gain." Her eyes held mine, the message clear. "You married up. Act accordingly." That night I cried in our bathroom, door locked, water running to muffle the sound. "Maybe we should move," I suggested to Michael later. "To Austin or even Houston. Somewhere not in her shadow." He looked stricken. "And leave everything? My job? Our friends?" "Sarah, this is just how she is. Don't take it personally." But how could I not? Every interaction with Patricia was personal, designed to remind me of my place, which was always beneath the Dawson name. The breaking point came on our 3rd anniversary. Patricia insisted on hosting a dinner party to celebrate us. I arrived early to help, only to find her in the kitchen with the caterer, reviewing my favorite dishes, all wrong. "Sarah prefers simple flavors," she told the chef. "Her palate isn't quite developed." I stood in the doorway, invisible. In that moment, I realized she would never accept me. Not because of anything I did or didn't do, but because I represented something she couldn't control, her son's choice to love outside her approved circle. That night, as guests mingled in Patricia's grand home, I slipped away to her study, a forbidden sanctuary where she conducted family business. I wasn't snooping, just seeking a moment's peace. On her desk lay a legal document, a revised will. I shouldn't have looked, but my name caught my eye. "In the event that my son remains married to Sarah Whitman, provisions shall be made to ensure the Dawson family assets remain protected from her influence or claim." There it was in black and white. I wasn't just disliked. I was a threat to be contained. Winter in Dallas brought a cold front that seemed to mirror the freeze in the Dawson household. Patricia's health began to decline shortly after that anniversary party, subtle at E. First, a persistent cough she blamed on the dry air, fatigue she attributed to her busy social calendar. By Christmas, it was impossible to ignore. Her skin had taken on a yellowish tint, and her tailored clothes hung loosely on her diminishing frame. "It's just a persistent bug," she insisted when Michael suggested seeing a specialist. "Dr. Matthews has been treating me for years. He knows what he's doing." But Dr. Matthews didn't know. Or if he did, he hadn't conveyed the severity to Patricia. By February, she was diagnosed with late-stage pancreatic cancer. The prognosis was grim. 6 months, perhaps less. The news transformed the Dawson mansion into a war room of sorts. Rebecca immediately moved back home to care for Mother, though her care seemed to involve more meetings with Patricia's financial advisors than actual nursing. Charles became a regular presence, bringing expensive but impersonal gifts. Rare orchids, imported chocolates Patricia couldn't eat, cashmere blankets for a woman who was perpetually feverish. Michael was devastated. Despite everything, he loved his mother deeply. He arranged for the best oncologists, researched experimental treatments, even flew a specialist in from Houston for a consultation. Nothing changed the inevitable march of Patricia's disease. I found myself in an impossible position. The woman who had tormented me for years was dying, and I was expected to grieve alongside the family. Instead, I felt a complex mixture of pity, relief, and guilt about that relief. I tried to be useful, bringing homemade soups she wouldn't touch, offering to read to her during long afternoons when pain kept her confined to bed. "I'm not senile, Sarah," she snapped when I suggested a book. "Just dying. I don't need your performative compassion." Her cruelty, at least, remained intact. One rainy April afternoon, I arrived at the mansion to find Patricia alone. The nurse had stepped out for supplies, and Rebecca was at her weekly salon appointment. Cancer in the family was no reason to neglect one's highlights. Patricia was sitting up in bed, gazing out at the rain-drenched garden. For a moment, she looked small, vulnerable. Then she saw me. "Come to check if I'm still breathing?" she asked. "I brought fresh flowers," I replied, holding up a bouquet of Texas bluebonnets, a peace offering of sorts. "How appropriate. Our state. Flower for our state's most obvious gold digger." I placed the flowers in a vase, not Ming Dynasty, and turned to leave. "Wait," she said, her voice suddenly less sharp. "Sit down, Sarah. It's time we had a proper conversation." I perched on the edge of a chair beside her bed, wary. In 4 years, we'd never had anything resembling a proper conversation. "You think I don't know what everyone says about me," she began. "The bitter widow, the controlling mother, the cruel mother-in-law." Her blue eyes, now watery but still piercing, fixed on mine. "They're not wrong." I remained silent, unsure if this was another trap. "I didn't welcome you into this family because you don't belong in it," she continued. "The Dawsons have a certain standard, a way of being that's maintained our position for generations. By making outsiders feel worthless?" I couldn't help asking. To my surprise, she laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "Precisely. It's a test, you see. Those who truly belong either have the pedigree to start or the strength to withstand scrutiny. Most break. They run away crying, or they show their true colors. Greed, usually." "I didn't marry Michael for money," I said. The old defense, rising automatically. "No, you didn't." She adjusted herself against the pillows, wincing slightly. "That's what makes you dangerous. You married him for love, which means you can't be bought off or easily dismissed." There was something like respect in her voice, the first I'd ever heard. Before I could process it, Rebecca burst into the room, dripping from the rain but with perfectly preserved hair. "Mother, you should be resting," she scolded, glaring at me as if I'd been torturing the patient. "Sarah, I think we can handle things from here." I left, my mind spinning from Patricia's words. Was it possible that after years of emotional warfare, she was acknowledging me as a worthy opponent? Or was this another mind game, a final twist of the knife before she departed? The next few weeks brought a parade of relatives I'd never met. Distant Dawson cousins, former business associates, college friends, all arrived with solemn faces and designer luggage, taking up residence in the mansion's guest rooms or nearby luxury hotels. All had stories about dear Patricia that portrayed a woman I'd never known. Generous, wise, nurturing. She paid for my daughter's entire education at Vassar. One cousin confided over coffee in the kitchen. "Never asked for recognition, just did it because family takes care of family." She gave me a pointed look as if to say, "Not that you'd understand." Charles spent hours in Patricia's study, emerging with grim satisfaction whenever financial matters were discussed. Rebecca began referring to herself as the one who'll be managing things soon, while systematically reorganizing Patricia's possessions, labeling certain items as family heirlooms that naturally would remain with blood Dawsons. Michael threw himself into work, a familiar coping mechanism. When home, he was distracted, distant. Our conversations revolved around medical updates and logistics, never touching the emotional undercurrents swirling through the mansion. One evening, as I was leaving Patricia's room after delivering her medication, Daniel Pierce arrived. Patricia's longtime lawyer and confidant, Pierce had always treated me with professional courtesy, but kept a careful distance. Tonight, however, he nodded at me with what seemed like newfound interest. "Mrs. Whitman," he said formally, "I understand you've been helping care for Patricia." "Trying to," I admitted. "She doesn't make it easy." A smile flickered across his otherwise serious face. "Few things involving Patricia Dawson are easy, but persistence is noted, always." He brushed past me into her room, closing the door firmly. Through the heavy wood, I could hear their muffled voices, hers weak but insistent, his measured and calm. They spoke for over an hour while the household pretended not to notice or care. Later that week, Patricia requested a private conversation with me again. This time she seemed more fragile. Her breathing labored between sentences. "When I'm gone," she said without preamble, "things will change for you." "I know," I replied, thinking of Rebecca's thinly veiled threats about restructuring the family dynamic. "No, you don't." Her hand, skeletal now but still adorned, with the massive diamond her husband had given her decades ago, reached for mine. I was too shocked to pull away. But you will. Just remember, not everything is as it seems in this family. Before I could ask what she meant, she closed her eyes, dismissing me. That night, I told Michael about both strange encounters, with Patricia and with her lawyer. Mom's always been cryptic, he said, loosening his tie after another 14-hour workday. And Daniel's been her right hand for 30 years. Whatever they're plotting, it's probably just last-minute estate adjustments to favor Rebecca. You know she's always been the favorite. It felt different, I insisted, like they were talking about me specifically. Michael kissed my forehead distractedly. Don't worry about it. Whatever Mom's planning, we'll handle it together. But as Patricia's condition worsened, I couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was brewing beneath the surface of Dawson family politics. The relatives grew more attentive, their concern directly proportional to their presumed distance from the inheritance. Rebecca practically moved into Patricia's study, emerging with armfuls of documents she refused to discuss. Charles began bringing his financial advisor to family dinners. And through it all, Patricia watched, even from her deathbed, with that calculating gaze I'd come to know so well. Only now, when it occasionally landed on me, I saw something new. Not warmth, certainly not affection, but something like anticipation. 2 days before she died, Patricia asked to see me alone again. The request caused such an uproar that Daniel Pierce had to intervene, citing client privilege and final wishes. I won't keep her long, Patricia told the assembled relatives, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah and I have unfinished business. When everyone reluctantly filed out, she motioned me closer. They think I'm going to apologize to you, she said, a ghost of her old smirk playing on her lips. For how I've treated you. Are you? I asked, not really expecting it. No. She coughed, a deep rattling sound. But I am going to ask you to do something for me. Something difficult. I waited, bracing myself. When I'm gone, they'll have a funeral. Big, ostentatious affair at St. Michael's. All of Dallas society will attend. Her breathing was labored now, each word an effort. I want you to deliver my eulogy. The request stunned me into silence. Of all the people in Patricia's life, I was the least qualified to speak about her with any genuine affection. Why me? I finally managed. Because, she said, her eyes suddenly sharp again, focused entirely on mine. It will be the ultimate test. If you can stand before everyone who knows how I treated you and speak well of me, you'll have proven something. Proven what? That you understand what truly matters. She closed her eyes. Daniel will give you the details. Now go. I'm tired. That was the last real conversation we had. Patricia Dawson slipped into a coma the following day and died peacefully in her sleep just after midnight. The house immediately filled with relatives' theatrical grief and whispered consultations about the will, and I was left with an impossible task, to eulogize the woman who had spent years trying to break me. The week between Patricia's death and funeral passed in a blur of activity. The Dawson mansion transformed into funeral headquarters, with Rebecca directing proceedings like a general commanding troops. Flower arrangements were scrutinized, catering menus debated, and guest lists meticulously curated. Throughout it all, I remained peripheral, acknowledged when necessary, but largely ignored, until Daniel Pierce arrived with Patricia's funeral instructions. Mrs. Dawson left explicit directions, he announced to the assembled family in the formal living room. His voice was measured, his expression unreadable behind wire-rimmed glasses. The service will be held at St. Michael's Cathedral. Bishop Montgomery will officiate, and the eulogy will be delivered by Sarah Whitman. The silence that followed was absolute. Rebecca recovered first, her perfectly glossed lips parting in outrage. That's absurd, she spat. I'm her daughter. I should deliver the eulogy. Charles nodded vigorously. Or Michael, at least. Someone who actually knew and loved Patricia. Daniel adjusted his glasses calmly. These were Mrs. Dawson's explicit wishes, documented and signed 3 weeks ago. The instructions are quite clear and legally binding as part of her final testament. All eyes turned to me. I felt the weight of their collective disbelief, suspicion, and resentment. She must have been confused, Rebecca insisted. The medication, Mrs. Dawson was fully lucid. When she made these arrangements, Daniel interrupted firmly, Dr. Matthews confirmed her mental competence at the time of signing. Michael, who had been silent until now, placed his hand over mine. If that's what Mother wanted, then Sarah will do it. His voice held a finality that silenced further protests. though Rebecca's glare promised this wasn't over. Later that evening, alone in our bedroom, I paced nervously while Michael watched from our bed. "I don't understand why she asked me to do this," I said. "Was it a final humiliation? Force me to stand up and pretend I loved her when everyone knows we barely tolerated each other?" Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair. A gesture so like his mother's it made my heart ache. Mom always had reasons for everything she did. Maybe this was her way of making peace. I laughed without humor. Peace? Patricia Dawson didn't make peace. She conquered. "Then consider it her final battle," he said softly. "One you can win by showing up and doing exactly what she asked. One last time." The following day, I met with Daniel Pierce in his downtown office, a sleek space of glass and polished wood that screamed old money and discreet power. He slid a sealed envelope across his desk. "Mrs. Dawson prepared this for you. Her guidance for the eulogy." The envelope felt heavy in my hands. Did she write it herself? Am I just supposed to read her words? Daniel's expression remained professionally neutral. "The contents are for you alone, Mrs. Whitman. I can tell you that Patricia was very specific about wanting your voice, not hers, to be heard at the service." I opened the envelope after leaving his office, sitting in my car in the underground parking garage. Inside was a single sheet of Patricia's monogrammed stationery, her elegant handwriting flowing across the page. "Sarah, by now you're wondering why I've chosen you for this task. It's simple. Of all the people in my life, you've seen me most clearly. Not the social persona or the family matriarch, but the difficult woman I truly was. Speak that truth, but remember, a eulogy is not just about who someone was, but what they leave behind. Consider carefully what my legacy should be. Patricia." No instructions, no pre-written speech, just a cryptic challenge that left me more confused than ever. For the next 3 days, I struggled with what to say. How could I speak truth about Patricia without scandalizing the mourners or betraying Michael? What legacy could I possibly highlight that wouldn't be a complete fabrication? The morning of the funeral arrived gray and drizzling, appropriate weather for the occasion. St. Michael's Cathedral was packed, every pew filled with Dallas's elite in somber designer black. The Dawson family occupied the front row, Michael stoic beside me, Rebecca dabbing theatrically at dry eyes, Charles maintaining an appropriate expression of gravity while checking his watch. Bishop Montgomery spoke first, his resonant voice echoing through the vaulted ceiling as he praised Patricia's community involvement and charitable giving. A former business associate reminisced about her sharp mind and unwavering principles. A representative from the Dallas Symphony Orchestra, where Patricia had been a major donor, praised her cultural patronage. All true, yet incomplete. None spoke of her cutting remarks, her judgmental nature, her ability to make others feel small with just a glance. The Patricia they described was a saint in Chanel, not the woman I had known. When my turn came, I approached the pulpit on legs that felt disconnected from my body. The weight of hundreds of curious stares pressed against me. I placed my handwritten notes on the wooden surface and took a deep breath. "Patricia Dawson," I began, my voice initially wavering before finding strength, "was a formidable woman." A murmur of agreement rippled through the cathedral. She demanded excellence in everything, from the flowers in her garden to the people in her life. She never settled for mediocrity, never accepted excuses, never backed down when she believed she was right. I paused, feeling Michael's supportive gaze. When I first joined the Dawson family, Patricia made it clear that her acceptance wasn't freely given. It had to be earned. Through years of, let's call them, character tests, she taught me something invaluable. About resilience. Rebecca shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Patricia believed that true worth wasn't measured by where you came from, but by whether you had the strength to stand your ground when challenged. She pushed people, sometimes to their breaking point, because she believed anything worth having required struggle. My voice grew steadier as I continued, walking the fine line between honesty and respect. She wasn't always easy to love. She could be sharp-tongued and critical. But beneath that formidable exterior was a woman who valued authenticity above all, who despised pretense and empty flattery, who demanded that those around her rise to their potential rather than sink to comfortable mediocrity. I looked directly at Rebecca and Charles now, whose expressions had shifted, from smugness to uncertainty. Patricia's legacy isn't just in the buildings that bear the Dawson name or the charities she supported, it's in the standard she set. A standard of resilience, of perseverance, of facing life's challenges with your spine straight and your head held high. Those who truly understood her know that her toughness wasn't cruelty for its own sake, but a forge designed to reveal true character. This was my tightrope, acknowledging Patricia's difficult nature while recasting it as something intentional, even principled. Not quite the truth, but not entirely false either. In her final days, Patricia showed the same strength she'd demanded from others. No complaints, no self-pity, just clear-eyed acceptance and preparation for what would come after she was gone. I felt a lump forming in my throat, surprised by my own emotion. I didn't always understand Patricia Dawson. I doubt many people truly did, but I respected her consistency, her unwillingness to compromise her standards, and ultimately, her clarity about what mattered most to her. Not social standing or wealth, but the strength of character that outlasts all material possessions. As I concluded, with a quote about legacy that Patricia had once referenced, I noticed Daniel Pierce watching me intently from his seat near the family. His slight nod felt like passing some invisible test. When I returned to my seat, Michael squeezed my hand gratefully. Rebecca's face was a study in controlled rage. Charles looked confused, as if trying to decode a hidden message in my words. The service continued with communion and final prayers before the procession to the cemetery. Throughout it all, I felt a strange lightness, as if speaking those carefully chosen words had lifted a burden I'd carried for years. At the graveside, as Patricia's mahogany casket was lowered into the ground, Daniel Pierce appeared beside me. "Well done," he murmured, his voice barely audible over the bishop's final blessing. "You understood exactly what she wanted." "Which was what?" I asked quietly. "Balance. Truth without destruction. Acknowledgement without veneration." His eyes, gray and perceptive, held mine. It's rare to find someone who can walk that line. Before I could ask what he meant, he moved away to speak with Michael. The cemetery began emptying as mourners headed to the mansion for the reception. I lingered a moment at the grave, watching cemetery workers prepare to cover the casket with earth. "Goodbye, Patricia," I whispered. "I hope that was what you wanted." What I didn't know then was that Patricia's final act of manipulation was just beginning to unfold. The Dawson mansion buzzed with subdued conversation as funeral guests filled the grand rooms. Catering staff circulated, with champagne and hors d'oeuvres, while Patricia's favorite classical pieces played softly in the background. I moved through the crowd, accepting condolences from people who had witnessed years of Patricia's thinly veiled hostility toward me, now expressing admiration for my touching and gracious eulogy. "Such dignity," whispered Mrs. Harrington, the garden club president. "Patricia always said you had unexpected depth." I doubted Patricia had ever said any such thing, but I smiled politely and moved on. Michael had been pulled into a conversation with his mother's former business associates, leaving me to navigate the social currents alone. Rebecca held court near the fireplace, accepting sympathy with practiced grace while subtly reminding everyone of her position as Patricia's daughter. Charles worked the room with calculated charm, his network expanding with each strategic conversation. I was reaching for a glass of water when Daniel Pierce appeared at my elbow. "The family will need to gather in the study at 3 o'clock, he said quietly, "for the reading of the will." My stomach tightened. Should I be there? I'm not a blood relative. Mrs. Dawson was explicit about who should be present. He replied, "You are definitely on that list." At precisely 3, we assembled in Patricia's study, a room that embodied her personality with its leather-bound books, antique desk, and imposing portrait of her late husband. Michael sat beside me on the leather sofa. Rebecca perched on a wingback chair, while Charles leaned against the fireplace mantel with forced casualness. Daniel Pierce stood behind the desk, arranging documents with methodical precision. "Before we begin," he said, adjusting his glasses, "Mrs. Dawson recorded a message to be played at this time." He pressed a button on a small digital recorder. Patricia's voice, stronger than in her final weeks, filled the room. "If you're listening to this, I've finally done what you've all been waiting for. I've died." Her characteristic bluntness brought an involuntary smile to my lips. "I've lived long enough to see through the performance of grief, so let's dispense with pretense. This recording exists to explain certain decisions I've made regarding my estate, decisions some of you may find unexpected." Rebecca straightened in her chair, fingers gripping the armrests. "The Dawson fortune didn't begin with me. It began with my husband, who built something from nothing through intelligence and determination. I protected and grew that fortune not for my own comfort, but because I believed wealth carries responsibility. Responsibility to preserve what matters." Her voice grew stronger, more deliberate. "What matters isn't money. What matters is character. Throughout my life, I've watched people carefully. I've tested them, sometimes cruelly, I admit, to see what they're made of. Because when the trappings of wealth are stripped away, all that remains is who you truly are. Charles shifted uncomfortably against the mantel. Rebecca, my daughter, you've always understood the Dawson name as currency, a birthright entitling you to certain privileges. Charles, my nephew, you've measured your worth against the family fortune for so long you've forgotten how to value anything else. The room grew tense with each pointed observation. Michael, my son, you inherited your father's work ethic, but not his hunger. You've allowed yourself to be defined by obligation rather than passion. And Sarah, my daughter-in-law, you endured years of my testing. Some might call it cruelty. I called it necessary. I felt Michael's hand find mine, squeezing gently. Today, you learn the results of those tests. Daniel will explain the specifics, but know this. My decisions weren't made lightly or in anger. They were made with clear-eyed assessment of who would best honor not just the Dawson fortune, but the Dawson legacy. The recording ended with a soft click. Daniel cleared his throat and lifted the formal document before him. The last will and testament of Patricia Eleanor Dawson, he began, his voice shifting to formal legal cadence. What followed was structured like a slow-motion explosion. Patricia had indeed rewritten her will in those final months, completely and irrevocably. Rebecca received a modest trust fund, enough to maintain her lifestyle, but with strict conditions. She would have access to her childhood home in Aspen and a monthly allowance, but no lump sum. Any attempt to contest the will would result in forfeiture of even that provision. Charles inherited Patricia's art collection. Valuable, certainly, but not the cash windfall he'd clearly been expecting. His portion also came with conditions. The collection must remain intact, available for public viewing at selected museums. He could neither sell nor profit directly from it. Michael received his father's business holdings and a directive to find what truly drives you, not what you believe you owe to the family name. His inheritance came with a 2-year timeline to either commit fully to the business or sell it to establish something more aligned with his personal values. Then Daniel paused, adjusting his glasses before continuing. To Sarah Whitman, my daughter-in-law, I leave the following. The Dawson family residence in Highland Park, with all its contents except those specifically designated elsewhere. The sum of $12 million to be used at her sole discretion, and controlling interest in the Dawson Foundation, with full authority to direct its charitable aid activities going forward. The room froze in collective shock. I felt as though all oxygen had been sucked away, leaving me unable to process what I'd just heard. Rebecca broke the silence, her voice shrill with disbelief. This is absurd. She's not even a Dawson by blood. The will is quite clear, Daniel replied calmly, and I can assure you it will withstand any legal challenge. Mrs. Dawson worked with 3 separate legal teams to ensure its validity. She wasn't thinking clearly, Charles insisted, his face flushed. The medication, the pain, she wasn't herself at the end. On the contrary, Daniel said, Patricia was meticulously deliberate about these decisions. She made them over several months with full mental capacity confirmed by her doctors at each revision. Why? The question escaped me before I could stop it. Why would she leave me anything, let alone this much? Daniel removed an envelope from inside the will's folder. Mrs. Dawson anticipated your confusion. She left this for you, to be read privately after the formal reading. Rebecca shot to her feet. This is unacceptable. I'll contest this travesty immediately. That would be unwise, Daniel replied, his voice cooling several degrees. Your mother included what lawyers call an in terrorem clause, a no-contest provision. If any beneficiary challenges the will, they forfeit their entire inheritance. She can't do this, Charles insisted, his charm evaporating into raw indignation. The Dawson estate should remain with Dawsons. Sarah is a Dawson, Michael said quietly, speaking for the first time since the reading began. By marriage, if not by blood. And clearly my mother saw something in her that she valued more than bloodlines. The study descended into heated arguments. Rebecca threatening legal action despite the warnings, Charles calculating losses, Michael attempting to maintain peace. Through it all, I sat stunned, the unopened letter from Patricia heavy in my hands. Eventually, Daniel called the meeting to a close. The terms are clear and final. I suggest everyone take time to process before making any rash decisions. His eyes met mine briefly. Mrs. Whitman, I'm available when you wish to discuss the foundation transition. As the others filed out, Rebecca storming ahead, Charles muttering about family betrayal. Michael and I remained in the study. Outside, we could hear the last funeral guests departing, unaware of the earthquake that had just reshuffled the Dawson dynasty. "Did you know?" I asked Michael when we were alone. "Did you have any idea she was planning this?" He shook his head, looking as shocked as I felt. "None. I expected her to favor Rebecca, honestly. She always seemed to." "Then why me?" I whispered, staring at the envelope in my hands. "After years of making me feel like an intruder?" Michael nodded at the letter. "I guess she wanted to tell you herself." With trembling fingers, I broke the seal and unfolded the single page inside. Patricia's elegant handwriting covered both sides. "Sarah, by now you're wondering if this is some elaborate final cruelty, giving you responsibility you never asked for and ensuring my children's resentment in the process. It isn't. I've watched you for 5 years. I've tested your patience, your resilience, your character. I've been unforgivably harsh, intentionally unfair, and coldly dismissive. Why? Because wealth destroys weak people, Sarah. I've seen it happen throughout my life, money amplifying the worst human instincts, entitlement, self-indulgence, moral laziness. You came into this family with nothing but your integrity. After years of my worst behavior, you maintained that integrity. You defended yourself without becoming bitter. You remained kind without becoming a doormat. You loved my son not for his surname, but for himself. Rebecca and Charles view the Dawson fortune as an entitlement. You never expected a penny. That makes you the only person I trust not to be corrupted by it. The foundation is my true legacy. Not the house, not the investments. I'm entrusting it to you because you understand something my own children never grasped. Privilege carries obligation. Use it wisely. Create the good that outlasts both of us. I won't ask for your forgiveness. What I did was cruel, even if purposeful. But know this. Of all the people in my life, you're the only one who passed every test that matters. Patricia. I looked up at Michael, tears blurring my vision. She says she was testing me. All these years. That sounds like Mother, he said softly, a complex mixture of emotions crossing his face. She never did anything without purpose. Outside the study window, I could see Rebecca on the front lawn, gesturing angrily while speaking on her phone. Charles was already driving away, gravel spraying from beneath his tires. "They'll never accept this," I whispered. Michael took the letter gently, reading it himself before meeting my eyes. They don't have to. It wasn't their test to pass. In that moment, surrounded by the trappings of Patricia Dawson's carefully constructed life, I realized the true inheritance wasn't the house or the money or even the foundation. It was the recognition, harsh and late though it was, that I had survived Patricia's gauntlet without surrendering who I was. The war was over, and somehow, without firing a single shot in return, I had won. The day after the funeral, I woke in our townhouse to the sound of my phone buzzing incessantly. 27 missed calls, most from Rebecca, 3 from Charles, and several from numbers I didn't recognize. Voicemails ranged from Rebecca's cold fury, "We need to discuss this ridiculous situation immediately," to thinly veiled threats from Patricia's more distant relatives. "The family won't stand for this outrage." Michael had already left for work. His way of processing was to immerse himself in contracts and depositions rather than face the emotional fallout. I couldn't blame him. He was caught between loyalty to his wife and lifelong bonds with his sister and cousin. I silenced my phone and made coffee, trying to process my new reality. Yesterday, I had been the outsider, the commoner who'd somehow trapped Michael Dawson into marriage. Today, I was the primary inheritor of the Dawson fortune, the unexpected keeper of Patricia's legacy. The doorbell rang at precisely 9 a.m. Daniel Pierce stood on my doorstep, briefcase in hand, expression professionally neutral as always. "Mrs. Whitman," he said with a slight nod. "I thought you might have questions." I led him to our kitchen, where he declined coffee but accepted water. He placed 3 thick folders on the table between us. "The foundation," he said, tapping the first folder. "The house," he continued, touching the second. "And your personal accounts," he finished, indicating the third. Mrs. Dawson was meticulous about organization. "Why didn't she tell me?" I asked, leaving the folders untouched. If this was her plan all along, why maintain the hostility until the very end? Daniel removed his glasses, polishing them thoughtfully before responding. Patricia believed in pressure testing. She felt people reveal their true nature not when treated well but when treated unfairly. He replaced his glasses precisely. In her view, inherited wealth often corrupts because it comes without being earned. She wanted to ensure you had earned it, so to speak. By enduring years of emotional abuse, the words came out sharper than I'd intended. By maintaining your integrity despite it, he corrected gently. Patricia didn't trust easily. The fact that she ultimately trusted you above her own children speaks volumes. I stared at the folders, each representing a responsibility I'd never asked for or expected. Rebecca will fight this. She'll try, Daniel acknowledged. She's already contacted 3 attorneys. But Patricia anticipated every possible challenge. The will is ironclad. That's not what I meant, I said quietly. The legal battle I can handle. It's the personal one I'm dreading. As if summoned by my words, my phone buzzed with a text from Michael. Rebecca at the office. Situation volatile. Coming home soon. Daniel followed my gaze to the screen. Patricia often said that inheritance reveals character more effectively than any other life event. I expect you'll see sides of the family you haven't witnessed before. He wasn't wrong. By noon, Michael had returned, his tie loosened, his expression grim. Rebecca's planning to contest, he said, pacing our living room. She's convinced Mother wasn't in her right mind. Daniel says the will is solid. This isn't about legal standing, Michael replied. It's about what Rebecca believes she deserves. She's been expecting to run the foundation for years. Finding out Mother chose you instead. He trailed off, rubbing his temples. And where do you stand? I asked, the question that had been haunting me since yesterday. He stopped pacing, his eyes meeting mine. I stand with you, Sarah. Always. He sank onto the couch beside me. Do I understand Mother's decision? Not entirely, but I respect it. And honestly, you've shown more grace under her criticism than anyone I've ever known. Before I could respond, our doorbell rang again, this time with angry, repeated jabs. Rebecca stood outside, her porcelain complexion flushed with emotion. Charles lingered behind her, his usual smooth demeanor replaced with tight-lipped tension. We need to talk, Rebecca announced, pushing past me into the house without waiting for an invitation. This situation is unacceptable. For the next hour, our living room became a battleground. Rebecca paced and gestured dramatically, her voice rising and falling as she outlined the obvious mistake Patricia had made. Mother was confused, she insisted. The medication affected her judgment. She couldn't have meant to leave the foundation to someone with absolutely no experience in philanthropy. The house should stay in the family, Charles added, his tone more measured but equally firm. It's been the Dawson residence for 3 generations. I sat quietly, letting them vent. Michael occasionally interjected, trying to maintain peace, but largely allowing his sister and cousin to exhaust their arguments. When they finally paused for breath, I spoke calmly. I understand this is shocking. It was for me, too. But Patricia was very clear about her wishes. Of course you'd say that, Rebecca snapped. You've just been handed a fortune you did nothing to deserve. Something in me, perhaps Patricia's final letter, perhaps years of absorbing such barbs in silence, shifted. I stood, meeting Rebecca's glare directly. What exactly did you do to deserve it, Rebecca? Besides being born a Dawson? The words were quiet, but firm. Your mother made her decision with full mental capacity. She explained her reasoning. You can accept that or fight it, but either way, it was her choice to make. Rebecca's mouth opened and closed, unused to direct confrontation from me. Charles stepped forward, ever the mediator when it suited him. Surely we can reach some compromise, he suggested smoothly. Perhaps a more equitable distribution. After all, family harmony is what Aunt Patricia would have wanted. Michael laughed, a short, disbelieving sound. Charles, when did Mother ever prioritize family harmony over making her point? She knew exactly what she was doing. The standoff continued, until Rebecca issued her ultimatum. Either I voluntarily redistribute Patricia's assets appropriately among the blood Dawsons, or she would pursue every legal avenue to invalidate the will, regardless of the no contest clause. You have 1 week to decide, she declared, gathering her designer purse. After that, this gets ugly. After they left, Michael and I sat in stunned silence until he finally spoke. You know what's ironic? Mother would have been impressed with how you handled that. I don't want their hatred, I said softly. But I also don't want to ignore Patricia's wishes. She had reasons, whatever they were. So what will you do? He asked. I glanced at Daniel's 3 folders, still untouched on our kitchen table. First, I need to understand exactly what I've inherited. Not just the assets, but the responsibility. The next morning, I drove to the Dawson Foundation offices in downtown Dallas, a sleek space occupying half a floor in one of the city's most prestigious buildings. Patricia had served as chairwoman since her husband's death 20 years earlier, shaping the foundation's mission and directing its considerable resources. The receptionist's eyes widened when I introduced myself. Clearly, news traveled fast in the Dawson orbit. She escorted me to Patricia's former office, a corner suite with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Dallas skyline. Elaine Jeffries, the foundation's longtime executive director, was waiting. A tall woman in her 60s with silver hair and penetrating dark eyes, she had worked alongside Patricia for 15 years. "Mrs. Whitman," she greeted me, her handshake firm, "I've been expecting you." The office was quintessential Patricia, elegant, imposing, with subtle touches of luxury in the antique desk and original artwork. I felt like an imposter sitting in her chair. "I assume you've heard about the unusual circumstances," I began. "Daniel briefed me yesterday," Elaine replied. I can't say I was entirely surprised. This caught me off guard. "You weren't?" She smiled slightly. "Patricia and I spoke daily. Over the past year, she mentioned you with increasing frequency. She was assessing you, I believe. Testing me," I corrected. "Call it what you will." Elaine opened a leather portfolio. The foundation currently manages assets of approximately $80 million. Our grant-making focuses on education, healthcare access, and arts preservation in North Texas. We fund 37 ongoing initiatives and review new proposals quarterly. My head swam with the scope of it. And Patricia expected me to step into her role? I'm an elementary school teacher. I don't know the first thing about managing a foundation, which is precisely why she left you this. Elaine handed me a sealed envelope with my name in Patricia's handwriting. She instructed me to give it to you during our first meeting. Another letter. Patricia seemed determined to direct me from beyond the grave. I broke the seal and began reading. "Sarah, if you're in my office now, you've taken the first step. Good. You're wondering why I chose you for this when you have no experience in philanthropy. The answer is simple. Fresh eyes. The foundation has become increasingly hidebound, funding the same organizations year after year because they're safe, established, and connected to the right people. You understand something essential that Rebecca never grasped. The difference between charity that maintains status quo and change that creates genuine opportunity. Your background in education gives you insight. Rebecca's social climbing never could. Elaine will guide you through the operational details. Trust her expertise, but not her caution. The foundation needs your perspective. The outsider's clarity I once resented but came to respect. This isn't about money. It's about impact. Don't let the old guard intimidate you into maintaining things as they've always been. Patricia. I looked up at Elaine, who watched me with careful neutrality. She wanted change, I said softly. Patricia always played a long game, Elaine replied. Even I didn't always understand her strategies until they unfolded fully. For the next 2 hours, Elaine walked me through the foundation's structure, current projects, and immediate decisions awaiting the new chair. She was thorough, professional, and impossible to read. I couldn't tell if she resented my sudden elevation or welcomed it. As I prepared to leave, she asked the question I'd been dreading. And what about Rebecca's challenge to the will? The staff is concerned about leadership stability. Patricia made her choice, I said, summoning confidence I didn't entirely feel. I intend to honor it. Driving back through Dallas traffic, I felt the weight of Patricia's expectations pressing against me. She hadn't just left me assets, she'd left me a mission, one I hadn't asked for but couldn't bring myself to reject. When I arrived home, a sleek black Bentley was parked in our driveway. Charles stood leaning against it, alone this time, his expression carefully arranged into something resembling contrition. "I thought we might talk," he said, smoothly, without Rebecca's drama, just reasonable adults finding a path forward. I hesitated, then gestured toward our front door. "Come in, but I should warn you my position hasn't changed since yesterday." Charles followed me inside, declining refreshments with practiced charm. Once seated in our living room, which now seemed shabby compared to Patricia's grand spaces, he got straight to business. "Rebecca's approach was unfortunate," he began. "She's always been emotional. I prefer more practical solutions, such as partnership," he said, leaning forward earnestly. "You control substantial assets now, Sarah. assets that could benefit from experienced management. I have connections, investment knowledge Rebecca lacks. Together, we could maximize the Dawson holdings while minimizing family conflict. The proposal was delivered with such smooth confidence that it took me a moment to recognize what he was really suggesting. An alliance against Rebecca, with him as the true power behind my newly acquired throne. And what would this partnership look like exactly? I asked, curious to see how far he'd go. Charles smiled, sensing potential receptivity. You maintain titular control of the foundation, the public face, if you will. I handle the investment strategy, portfolio management, board relationships. We restructure certain assets for greater efficiency. Everyone benefits. Everyone except Rebecca? He waved dismissively. Rebecca needs structure, not autonomy. Patricia understood that, which is why she limited her inheritance. Between us, Sarah, she's never had her mother's business acumen. I studied Charles, handsome, polished, and utterly transparent in his opportunism. Patricia had read him perfectly. Wealth without character, ambition without principle. Thank you for the offer, I said carefully, but I think I'll follow Patricia's plan for now. His charming facade slipped momentarily, revealing a flash of the same anger Rebecca had displayed. But Charles recovered quickly, rising with practiced grace. Of course, it's early days yet. Just remember, family politics can be exhausting. My offer remains open when you tire of fighting battles alone. After he left, I sat in our quiet living room, processing the rapid transformations of the past 48 hours. Patricia had warned me in her letter that inheritance reveals character. She hadn't mentioned how quickly that revelation would come. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. Meeting running late. Don't wait up. Alone with my thoughts, I opened Daniel's folders and began reading, determined to understand exactly what Patricia had entrusted to me, and why she believed I was the right person to receive it. The Dawson mansion stood silent and imposing as I pulled into its circular driveway the following morning. According to Daniel's documents, this 15,000-square-foot Highland Park estate, valued at just over $14 million, now belonged to me. The thought was so absurd I almost laughed out loud. I used the key Daniel had provided, feeling like an intruder despite my legal ownership. The grand foyer echoed with my footsteps as I moved, through rooms that had witnessed decades of Dawson history. The formal dining room where Patricia had hosted Dallas's elite, the library where family meetings were held, the sunroom where she took her morning coffee while reading financial reports. Everything remained exactly as she had left it. Expensive, immaculate, and coldly perfect, like Patricia herself. In her bedroom suite, the scent of her Chanel perfume still lingered. Her closet remained filled with designer clothes organized by color and season. Her jewelry safe, which Daniel had given me the combination to, held pieces worth more than my parents' house. I sat on the edge of her perfectly made bed, overwhelmed by the strangeness of it all. 5 days ago, I had been an elementary school teacher married to a Dawson, but never truly accepted as one. Now I owned the family seat, controlled their philanthropic legacy, and had become the target of their collective resentment. What were you thinking, Patricia? I whispered to the empty room. As if in answer, my phone rang. An unknown number. Mrs. Whitman? A woman's voice asked when I answered. This is Mrs. Ellis from Highland Park Academy. I'm calling about the Dawson Scholarship Fund. The call was the first of many. Throughout the morning, my phone continued ringing with representatives from various organizations Patricia had supported. Museum board members, hospital administrators, charity directors. Word had spread about her death, and they were eager to establish relationships with her successor. Each call made it clearer. Patricia Dawson hadn't just been wealthy. She'd been influential. Her donations came with expectations, her support with strings. People had feared her judgment but craved her approval. By noon, I escaped to the garden. Patricia's pride and joy, a meticulously landscaped acre featuring classical statuary and rare specimens. I sat on a stone bench beside a reflecting pool, trying to gather my thoughts. She spent every Saturday. Morning out here? A voice said behind me. I turned to find Elaine Jeffries standing on the garden path, looking somehow less formidable outside the office environment. What are you doing here? I asked, surprised. Patricia kept important foundation documents in her home office. I came to retrieve them for next week's board meeting. She gestured to the garden around us. This was her sanctuary. She claimed to prefer plants to people, more responsive to proper care and less demanding of constant attention. I smiled despite myself. That sounded exactly like Patricia. Elaine sat beside me, her professional reserve softening slightly. You're overwhelmed. It wasn't a question. Completely, I admitted. Everyone's calling, expecting me to step seamlessly into her shoes. Rebecca's threatening legal action. Charles is proposing partnerships that would give him control, and Michael's caught in the middle. What does your instinct tell you to do? I considered the question. Run away. Go back to teaching third grade. Pretend none of this ever happened. I shook my head. But that would mean ignoring Patricia's last wishes. For some reason, that feels wrong. Elaine studied me thoughtfully. May I offer some unsolicited advice? Please. Don't try to be Patricia. You'll fail, and that's not what she wanted anyway. Elaine gestured toward the mansion. All this, the house, the foundation, the social position, they were tools to Patricia, not treasures. Means to an end. What end? Impact, Elaine said simply. Patricia didn't care about being liked. She cared about being effective, about leaving something meaningful behind when she was gone. I thought about Patricia's letters, her emphasis on character over wealth, substance over appearance. She spent years making me feel unwelcome, only to leave me everything. I still don't understand why. I have a theory, Elaine said carefully. Patricia grew up with nothing. She married into wealth, but never forgot what it meant to be an outsider. She recognized something in you, an outsider's perspective, perhaps, or a strength she respected. She had a strange way of showing respect. Elaine smiled slightly. Patricia didn't believe in making anything easy, especially not for people she valued. The harder the test, the more meaningful the achievement. As Elaine left to gather her documents, her words lingered with me. Patricia had been testing me, not to break me, but to confirm what she'd already suspected, that I could withstand pressure without compromising who I was. Inside the house, I wandered into Patricia's study, a wood-paneled sanctuary with built-in bookshelves and a massive antique desk. This was where she had made decisions that affected countless lives, where she had, crafted her legacy with meticulous care. On the desk sat a leather-bound calendar still open to the week of her death. Appointments, notes, reminders in her precise handwriting. One entry caught my eye. 3 p.m. Sarah, final arrangements. That had been our last real conversation, when she'd asked me to deliver her eulogy. She'd known exactly what she was doing, setting her final test in motion. I opened desk drawers, not searching for anything specific but seeking some deeper understanding of the woman who had tormented and then empowered me. In the bottom drawer, I found a photo album I'd never seen before, older than the carefully curated family albums displayed in the living room. The first pages showed a young Patricia, perhaps 17 or 18, in simple clothes, standing outside a small, modest house. Her expression was determined, her posture already regal despite humble surroundings. Subsequent photos documented her transformation, college graduation, early marriage to Thomas Dawson, their growing social prominence. I'd never seen these images of Patricia's origins. She had always presented herself as if born to wealth and privilege. The family narrative mentioned her, attending the right schools and moving in the right circles, but nothing about this clearly modest beginning. The final pages held recent photos, including, to my surprise, several of me and Michael at various family events. In one, taken at last year's Christmas gathering, I was laughing at something off camera, unaware of being photographed. Patricia had captioned it simply, "Resilient." The album provided a glimpse into a Patricia Dawson few had been allowed to see, a woman who had reinvented herself, who understood what it meant to be judged and found wanting based on background rather than character. My phone rang again, Michael this time. "How are you holding up?" he asked, his voice tired. "I'm at your mother's house," I said. "It feels strange being here." "Our house now," he corrected gently. "Have you decided what you want to do with it?" The question caught me off guard. In the chaos of the past days, I hadn't thought that far ahead. "I don't know. It's too big for just us. And it holds so many memories. Not all of them pleasant. We could sell it," he suggested. "Start fresh somewhere else." The idea was tempting. Escape the physical reminder of Patricia's domain, the site of so many uncomfortable family gatherings. But something held me back. "Let me think about it," I said. "There's so much happening at once." After we hung up, I continued exploring the house with new eyes, not as an intimidated guest, but as someone trying to understand its place in Patricia's carefully constructed legacy. Each room reflected her exacting standards, her refusal to accept anything less than perfection. In the West Wing, I discovered Patricia's private sitting room, a space I'd never been invited to enter during her lifetime. Unlike the formal public rooms, this one contained personal touches, photographs, books with marked passages, a cashmere throw draped over a reading chair. Here, Patricia had allowed herself comfort rather than just impressive display. On a side table sat a small wooden box. Inside were handwritten notes, some from Thomas before his death, others from Michael through the years. Birthday cards, thank you notes, expressions of love and appreciation that contradicted the stern, demanding Patricia I had known. Also in the box was an envelope addressed to Rebecca in Patricia's handwriting, sealed but never sent. I set it aside, respecting its privacy despite my curiosity. As evening approached, I reluctantly prepared to leave. The house felt too empty, too full of ghosts to stay overnight. Tomorrow would bring more calls, more questions, more decisions I didn't feel qualified to make. At the front door, I paused for one last look at the grand staircase, the crystal chandelier, the marble floors that had so intimidated me on my first visit. Patricia had wielded this house like a weapon, using its grandeur to emphasize my outsider status. Now it was mine, not to wield as she had, but to repurpose in whatever way seemed right. Outside, Rebecca's Mercedes pulled into the driveway, blocking my exit. She emerged looking immaculate as always, but with tension visible in the tight lines around her mouth. "I thought I might find you." "Here," she said coldly. "Already moving in?" "Just looking around," I replied, determined to remain calm. "It's a lot to process." "That's my childhood home you're processing," she snapped. "Every important memory I have happened under this roof. And now you think you can just claim it because Mother had some bizarre change of heart at the end?" I could have pointed out that legally, that's exactly what had happened. Instead, I asked, "Would you like to come inside? We should talk." Surprise flashed across her face before she masked it with suspicion. "What is there to talk about? Unless you've reconsidered my proposal." "I'd like to understand your perspective," I said honestly. "This situation affects all of us. I think Patricia would want us to find a way forward that respects her wishes while acknowledging everyone's feelings." Rebecca hesitated, then gave a terse nod. I led her back into the house, to the kitchen, rather than any of the formal rooms. It had always been the least intimidating space in the mansion, the one place where Patricia rarely ventured. I made tea while Rebecca sat stiffly at the breakfast table, her eyes cataloging every detail as if searching for evidence of my interference. "I found something today," I said, placing a cup before her. "Photos of your mother when she was young, before she married your father." Rebecca's expression flickered with momentary interest before hardening again. Mother never discussed her background. It wasn't relevant to who she became. "I think it was very relevant," I countered gently. "I think it shaped everything about her, including her expectations for you and Michael." "Don't presume to understand my mother better than I did," Rebecca warned. "A few days with her legal documents doesn't give you insight into our relationship." I sipped my tea, considering my next words carefully. "Did you know about her final letter to you? The one she never sent?" Rebecca's cup froze halfway to her lips. "What letter?" I retrieved it from the sitting room and placed it on the table between us. I didn't read it, but it was with her personal papers. She stared at the envelope, her name written in Patricia's distinctive hand, as if it might bite. "This is manipulation, another one of her tests." "Maybe," I agreed. "Or maybe it's something she wanted you to know but couldn't bring herself to say." Rebecca's perfectly manicured fingers trembled slightly as she picked up the envelope. "This doesn't change anything. I'm still contesting the will." "That's your choice," I said. "But before you do, I'd like to propose something different from what you suggested. Not redistribution of assets, but partnership of a different kind." Her eyes narrowed. "What kind of partnership?" "One that honors Patricia's wishes while respecting your connection to this house and the foundation. I'm not interested in erasing you from the Dawson legacy, Rebecca. I think there's room for both of us to carry it forward, just not in the way either of us expected." For the first time since Patricia's death, Rebecca looked at me with something other than contempt. Cautious curiosity mingled with lingering suspicion. "I'm listening," she said. As night fell outside the kitchen windows, we began a conversation neither of us could have imagined having a week earlier. Two women connected by Patricia Dawson's complicated legacy, searching for a path forward that neither betrayed her final wishes nor perpetuated her lifetime of tests and judgments. 3 months after Patricia's funeral, Dallas society was still buzzing with speculation. The Dawson drama had provided endless material for whispered conversations at charity galas and country club luncheons. Most of the gossip centered around me, the outsider who had somehow secured Patricia Dawson's fortune, while her blood relatives were left with conditional scraps. What the gossips didn't know was how much had changed beneath the surface. On a warm Tuesday morning, I stood in Patricia's, now my, office at the Dawson Foundation reviewing grant proposals with Elaine. The space had been transformed. Patricia's imposing mahogany desk replaced with a round table, her intimidating leather chair swapped for more welcoming seating, her austere art exchanged for colorful pieces from local artists. The Education Committee approved the funding for the South Dallas Literacy Initiative, Elaine noted, sliding a folder across the table. They were particularly impressed by the parent involvement component. I smiled, remembering the passionate presentation from the program director, a former colleague from my teaching days. That's the fourth new initiative we've funded this quarter. Patricia would be horrified, Elaine suggested with a rare smile. I was going to say surprised, I laughed. But maybe that too. We were interrupted by a knock at the door. Rebecca entered, impeccably dressed as always, though the brittle edge that had defined her for years seemed softened somehow. Am I interrupting? She asked. Not at all, I replied. We were just finishing up. Elaine, can you give us a moment? After Elaine departed, Rebecca took her place at the table. 3 months ago, I would have been tensing for battle at her arrival. Now, there was an uneasy truce between us. Not friendship exactly, but a working relationship that would have seemed impossible in the immediate aftermath of Patricia's will reading. The letter, Patricia's unsealed final message to her daughter, had been the beginning. Rebecca had never revealed its exact contents to me, but whatever Patricia had written had cracked something open in Rebecca's carefully maintained facade. The board approved your proposal for the mental health initiative, she said, sliding a document toward me. Unanimous support, actually. As part of our negotiated peace, Rebecca had joined the foundation's board of directors, bringing her connections and social influence while I maintained final decision-making authority. The arrangement had been Daniel Pierce's suggestion, a compromise that respected Patricia's wishes while acknowledging Rebecca's lifelong involvement with the Dawson name. That's wonderful news, I said sincerely. It was a strong proposal. Rebecca nodded, a hint of pride crossing her features. Mental health support had been her first independent contribution to the foundation's work, a cause Patricia had always dismissed as trendy charity without substance. There's something else, Rebecca said, her tone shifting. I've been going through Mother's personal papers at the house. The house, the most contentious piece of Patricia's legacy, had become our most unexpected solution. Instead of selling it or moving in myself, I had made a different decision, transforming the Dawson Mansion into the Foundation's headquarters and a community space for the organizations we supported. Rebecca maintained an office there, overseeing the transition, while I focused on grant-making. What did you find? I asked, curious. She removed an aged envelope from her designer handbag. Letters between mother and father from before they were married. I thought you might want to see them. I accepted the envelope with surprise. Rebecca sharing family artifacts was unprecedented, a gesture that would have been unthinkable before Patricia's death. Thank you, I said softly. Why show these to me? Rebecca seemed to choose her words carefully. They present a different side of Mother. One, I think, explains certain decisions she made. Later that evening, alone in the townhouse Michael and I still called home, I opened the packet of letters. The earliest were from 1968. Thomas Dawson, already wealthy and established at 32, writing to 20-year-old Patricia Ellis, a scholarship student at Southern Methodist University. My dearest Patricia, your letter arrived this morning, and I find myself once again amazed by your determination. While other girls might have crumbled under the scorn of those society snobs, you've simply doubled your efforts. This is precisely why I believe in you as I do. You understand that respect must be earned through substance, not inherited through circumstance. Dallas society will never make this easy for you. They see only your humble beginnings, not the formidable woman you are becoming, but that is their loss. When we marry, they will have no choice but to acknowledge you, though I suspect you'll never fully care for their approval anyway. Remember what I told you. Worth is proven under pressure. Those born to privilege rarely develop the strength that comes from fighting for one's place. Our children will have advantages neither of us had, but we must ensure they develop the character that comes from overcoming resistance. Forever yours, Thomas. Letter after letter revealed a younger, vulnerable Patricia, fighting for acceptance in a world that judged her for her background, determined to prove herself worthy of the position she would occupy as Thomas Dawson's wife. Thomas had clearly adored her tenacity, her refusal to be diminished by those who considered her beneath them. The final letter in the packet was dated just weeks before their wedding. My Patricia. Your concerns about the wedding guest list made me smile. Yes, the Hendersons and Whitfields have been business associates for years. No, they have never approved of you and likely never will. Invite them anyway. You ask why we should include those who've been unkind. My answer is simple. Success is the best revenge. Let them witness your triumph. Let them see you, once dismissed as the scholarship girl, take your place as Mrs. Thomas Dawson with your head held high. You've earned your position through intelligence and character, not by accident of birth. Never forget that distinction. It will serve you well in the years ahead, and it will be the most valuable lesson we can impart to our children. With deepest love and admiration, Thomas. I set the letters down, a complex understanding settling over me. Patricia's cruelty hadn't been random. It had been learned. She had endured the same judgment she later inflicted on me, but without the support I'd had in Michael. When Thomas died, she lost the one person who had valued her for herself, rather than her position. She had tested Rebecca and Michael, their entire lives, pushing them to develop the strength she'd needed to survive in Dallas society. When they responded with entitlement rather than resilience, she had been disappointed, but not surprised. And then I had arrived. Another outsider, another woman judged for not being Dawson enough. But unlike Patricia, who had hardened under scrutiny, I had maintained a core of compassion she must have recognized as both different from and superior to her own response. The realization was both illuminating and heartbreaking. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. Meeting with Charles went better than expected. Tell you about it when I get home. The final piece of Patricia's complex legacy had been the business holdings she left to Michael. After weeks of soul-searching, he had decided to sell his law practice and take over active management of Dawson Enterprises, not out of obligation to the family name, but because he discovered a genuine interest in the business his father had built. Charles, surprisingly, had become an ally in the transition. After his initial anger subsided, his pragmatic nature reasserted itself. He recognized that collaboration offered more benefits than continued hostility. His art expertise, previously just a social affectation, had proven valuable in the Foundation's cultural initiatives. When Michael arrived home later that evening, he found me surrounded by Patricia's letters. Rebecca shared these with me, I explained, showing him the correspondence. I think I finally understand your mother. He read them silently, his expression growing thoughtful. I never knew this version of her. By the time I was old enough to notice, she was already formidable. She became what she thought she needed to be, I said, and then couldn't find her way back. Michael set the letters aside, taking my hands in his. Which makes what you've done even more remarkable. You faced the same test without becoming hardened by them. I had something. She didn't, I reminded him. I had you. He smiled, though his eyes remained serious. I should have protected you better from her. I knew how she could be, and I still let you face her alone too often. Maybe that's exactly what needed to happen, I suggested. If you had shielded me more, I might never have developed the strength that made her respect me in the end. We sat together on our living room couch, the same modest furniture we'd had before Patricia's death, in the same townhouse we'd decided to keep. Despite having access to the Dawson fortune, we'd made few changes to our personal lives. The Foundation was where the real transformation was happening. Do you think she'd approve? Michael asked. Of what we're doing with her legacy? I considered the question carefully. I think she'd be surprised, maybe uncomfortable with the direction at first. But ultimately, I think she'd respect that we're making deliberate choices based on conviction rather than convenience. I smiled. That seems to be what she valued most. Michael nodded, then hesitated before adding, Rebecca mentioned she's thinking of joining the Foundation full-time, leaving the social circuit for actual work. I never thought I'd see the day. People can surprise you, I said, when given the right opportunity. Outside our window, Dallas continued its evening rhythms, a city where family names still opened doors, and social hierarchies remained stubbornly entrenched. But within the sphere of Patricia's legacy, small revolutions were taking place. The Dawson Foundation was funding programs that addressed root causes rather than symptoms, challenging systemic barriers rather than simply providing charity. The irony wasn't lost on me. Patricia Dawson, who had spent decades enforcing social boundaries, had ultimately empowered me to dismantle some of those same structures. Her final test had become her most meaningful gift, Not just to me, but to the community she had both dominated and served. That night, I dreamed of Patricia, not the stern, intimidating matriarch I had feared, but the young woman from the photographs, determined and resilient, fighting for her place in a world that underestimated her. In my dream, she simply nodded at me, a gesture of acknowledgement between two women who understood what it meant to be tested and emerge stronger. 1 year to the day after Patricia's funeral, I stood at the podium in the newly renovated ballroom of the Dawson Mansion. The space, once the site of exclusive social gatherings, was filled with a different crowd. Educators from South Dallas, healthcare workers from community clinics, artists from neighborhoods that had never before crossed the Highland Park threshold. Welcome to the first annual Dawson Foundation Community Summit, I began, looking out at the diverse faces before me. Today marks not just a year since Patricia Dawson's passing, but the beginning of a new chapter in the Foundation's work. From my vantage point, I could see Michael in the front row, his expression proud. Beside him sat Rebecca, her traditional Chanel replaced by a more subtle suit, a notebook open on her lap. Charles stood near the back, deep in conversation with the director of a local museum. Elaine Jeffries observed from the side, her usual reserve softened by what looked suspiciously like satisfaction. Patricia Dawson believed in testing character, I continued. In her own way, she understood that true worth is revealed under pressure. While her methods were unconventional, this earned knowing laughter. From those who had known her, her commitment to substance over appearance shaped everything she did. The past year had been transformative in ways I could never have imagined when I delivered Patricia's eulogy. The foundation had expanded its mission beyond traditional giving to address systemic inequalities in Dallas. The mansion had become a hub for community organizations. The Dawson name, once synonymous with exclusive privilege, was being redefined through accessible action rather than protected status. Today we're announcing the Patricia Dawson Legacy Initiative, I said, revealing the Foundation's most ambitious program yet. A 10-year, $20 million commitment to educational equity in North Texas, focusing on schools in underserved communities. The announcement generated enthusiastic applause. In the audience, I noticed Daniel Pierce nodding approvingly. The lawyer had become an unexpected ally, guiding us through the legal complexities of restructuring the foundation while remaining true to his long-term client's intentions. This initiative honors not just the Patricia Dawson that Dallas society knew, I continued, but the young woman who once received a scholarship that changed her life trajectory. Who understood that opportunity, when provided at the right moment, can transform potential into impact. After my speech, as attendees mingled and networked, Rebecca approached me with 2 glasses of champagne. Not bad, she said, handing me one. Though Mother would have had at least 3 criticisms of your delivery. Only 3? I laughed. I must be improving. We had developed an unexpected rhythm over the past year. Not friendship exactly, but a working relationship built on growing mutual respect. The letter Patricia had left for Rebecca remained private between mother and daughter, but whatever it contained had catalyzed a gradual transformation in the once brittle socialite. The education initiative was a good call, Rebecca acknowledged. Though the board nearly had collective apoplexy when you proposed the budget, they approved it eventually. After you channeled Mother's best intimidation tactics. Rebecca's lips curved in reluctant admiration. That was something I never expected to see. You using Patricia Dawson methods to completely upend Patricia Dawson traditions. I prefer to think of it as honoring her persistence while updating her vision, I replied diplomatically. Rebecca studied me over her champagne glass. You've done well, you know, with all of this. Better than I would have. Coming from Rebecca, this was equivalent to a standing ovation. We've done well, I corrected gently. Your work with the mental health programs has been groundbreaking. She accepted the compliment with a slight nod. Mother was right about one thing. You do have backbone. I just never understood why that mattered so much to her until recently. Before I could respond, we were interrupted by the arrival of Mrs. Harrington, Garden Club president and longtime Dawson family acquaintance, accompanied by a younger woman I didn't recognize. Sarah, darling, Mrs. Harrington gushed with the artificial warmth of Dallas society. What a lovely event. So inclusive. The slight hesitation spoke volumes about her true feelings. I wanted to introduce my niece, Melissa. She's recently married James Sullivan. You remember the Sullivans from Highland Park? The subtext was clear. The Sullivans represented old Dallas money, the kind of connection Patricia had always emphasized as important. Melissa's just moved to Dallas, Mrs. Harrington continued, And she's eager to get involved with the right organizations. I thought the Dawson Foundation might be looking for new committee members. A year ago, this interaction would have intimidated me. The implication that a Sullivan connection automatically warranted consideration. The social maneuvering disguised as casual introduction. Now, I simply smiled. We're always looking for passionate contributors, I said warmly. Our education committee could use volunteers for the after-school reading program in Oak Cliff. It's hands-on work, 3 afternoons a week with elementary students. Mrs. Harrington's smile tightened. Oh, I was thinking more along the lines of the gala committee or board development. We've actually restructured those committees, Rebecca interjected smoothly. We're prioritizing members with direct experience in the communities we serve, but the reading program is an excellent way to get that experience. Mrs. Harrington looked from Rebecca to me in confusion, clearly unsettled by our united front. Well, I'll certainly have Melissa consider it, she said faintly before making a graceful retreat. When they were out of earshot, Rebecca and I exchanged knowing glances before dissolving into laughter. Patricia would be horrified, Rebecca said, wiping away tears of mirth. A Sullivan being directed to volunteer in Oak Cliff. Or maybe not, I suggested. Remember her letters to your father? How she felt about people who judged based on background rather than substance? Rebecca's amusement softened into thoughtfulness. Sometimes I wonder if the mother I knew was really her at all, or if she created that persona to survive, then couldn't find her way back. People become what they practice being, I said quietly, for better or worse. As the event continued around us, I excused myself to step outside onto the terrace, Patricia's favorite spot for quiet reflection according to Michael. The garden beyond had been reimagined as part of the mansion's transformation. Patricia's formal, manicured design now complemented by native Texas wildflowers and accessible pathways. I heard footsteps behind me and turned to find Daniel Pierce approaching, his usual formality softened by the relaxed atmosphere. Mrs. Dawson would be pleased, he said, joining me at the stone balustrade. Not that she would admit it readily, of course. I smiled at the accuracy of his assessment. Did you know this would happen? When she changed her will? Daniel considered the question. Patricia rarely shared her full intentions, even with me. But she was a shrewd judge of character. She saw something in you that she believed would serve her legacy better than the alternatives. I still don't understand why she tested me so harshly for years, only to trust me completely in the end. Patricia believed that character reveals itself most truly under pressure, Daniel said. She'd seen too many people crumble or compromise when faced with adversity. He paused, adjusting his glasses. You didn't. The simplicity of his assessment struck me. I hadn't realized Patricia had been watching so closely. Not just my reaction to her criticism, but my core values under stress. There's something else, Daniel added, reaching into his jacket. Patricia instructed me to give you this 1 year after her passing. Today. He handed me a sealed envelope, the now familiar monogrammed stationery with my name in Patricia's elegant script. I'll leave you to it, he said, returning inside with discreet efficiency. I opened the envelope with a mixture of curiosity and trepidation, still not fully accustomed to Patricia's posthumous communications. Sarah, if you're reading this, a year has passed since my death. Daniel will have given you this letter only if you've maintained control of the foundation and implemented significant changes, evidence that you understood what I was entrusting to you. Wasn't merely wealth, but purpose. I wasn't kind to you. That wasn't an act or a test, but a flaw in my character. Years of fighting for respect hardened me into someone who demanded rather than invited it. By the time I recognized this calcification, it was too late to change how others saw me, or perhaps I lacked the courage to try. What you've endured from me, I once endured from others. The difference is in how you responded. Where I became brittle, you remained flexible. Where I became defensive, you stayed open. I tested you harshly because I needed to be certain. Would power corrupt you as it did me? It hasn't. And it won't. You were never meant to become me, Sarah. You were meant to become what I couldn't. Someone who wields influence with compassion rather than fear, who creates opportunity rather than obligation. This is my true legacy. Not the money or the social position, but the chance to place the Dawson resources in hands that will use them with both strength and kindness. Qualities I recognized in you long before I was willing to acknowledge them. Patricia, I folded the letter carefully, blinking back unexpected tears. In her final communication, Patricia had given me something she'd never offered in life: vulnerability. acknowledgement of her flaws, recognition of my strengths not as a concession, but as the very reason for her choice. Through the terrace doors, I could see the summit continuing successfully. Rebecca deep in conversation with community leaders, Charles explaining artwork to interested attendees, Michael moving between groups with natural ease. All of us transformed in ways large and small by Patricia's final decision. Sarah? Michael appeared at the doorway. Everything okay? I tucked the letter into my pocket. Yes, just taking a moment. He joined me on the terrace, his arm slipping around my waist. Quite a year, hasn't it been? I leaned against him, thinking of all we'd navigated since that day in the chapel when I delivered Patricia's eulogy. The conflicts, negotiations, revelations, and gradual healing that had brought us to this point. Your mother once told me that wealth destroys weak people, I said. I think what she meant was that power reveals who we truly are. Michael nodded thoughtfully. And what has it revealed about us? I considered the question, looking back at the gathering inside. Diverse, purposeful, engaged in ways the Dawson mansion had never witnessed before. That we're stronger together than apart, I said finally. That legacies matter, but they can also evolve. That dignity isn't about what you own, but what you stand for. Inside, a speaker was calling attendees back to their seats for the next session. Michael and I lingered a moment longer on the terrace. A brief, private acknowledgement of the journey that had brought us here. Ready? He asked. I took one last look at Patricia's garden, reimagined but still rooted in her original vision. Ready? As we returned to the summit, I carried Patricia's letter close. A final message from a complicated woman who had tested me relentlessly in life and trusted me completely in death. Her legacy wasn't just the wealth she'd left behind, but the understanding that true inheritance isn't measured in dollars, but in dignity. Not in possessions, but in purpose. In her own harsh way, Patricia Dawson had given me the most valuable gift possible, the chance to create something better than what came before. A year after standing in that chapel, delivering a eulogy I hadn't meant, I was now living a truth I deeply believed, that wealth without compassion is meaningless, and power without purpose is empty. Patricia's final test had become my most meaningful opportunity, and in passing it, I had found not just a legacy to manage, but a purpose to fulfill.